Hello, I'm Roger Watson, Editor-in-Chief of Nurse Education and Practice, and in this short 10-minute or so session I'm going to talk about writing the results section of an academic manuscript. Now, just to recap on previous sessions, we're well on the way with our academic manuscript now. We've dealt with the title, the abstract, the introduction, the background, and then the methods section, which followed directly from the background. Clearly, the results section, which comes next, should follow logically from the methods section, because this is not just describing what you did, this is describing what you found. So rather like the methods section, I think a good results section should be relatively short. Again, I think you should be aiming to write about 500 words or so. Please, that's not a prescription, it's just a guideline and a recommendation. The main recommendation being that you shouldn't make it too long. Again, like the methods section, the results section should be discrete. In other words, it should stand alone. Obviously, you may have to refer back to the methods section to see what's been done if you're reading the paper, but it shouldn't depend on that, and it shouldn't in itself necessarily refer back to the methods section, other than to say, for example, the results of a t-test were, or whatever, however you want to do that. Now, I'm going to, because time is limited, I'm going to talk mainly about writing the results section for a quantitative paper. The reason I'm going to do this is that I'm not an expert in qualitative research, and there are some arguments within the qualitative research community about writing results for qualitative manuscripts. And you really just have to make sure that you're doing what the journal wants you to do. But one of the big arguments, or discussions, should I say, about presenting qualitative research is that some authors prefer to do the results and the discussion at the same time. However, there's also a body of thought within qualitative work that says, no, the qualitative results should be presented discreetly and then discussed separately in a separate discussion section. So it's very important that you do whatever the journal needs or allows you to do. I tend, as an editor, to prefer seeing the qualitative results presented separately from the discussion. And the only other thing that I do want to say about qualitative results is that they can be very long. They tend to be longer sections than quantitative papers, and authors often ask me, can I have more room in my paper if it's qualitative? And actually, publishers are very reluctant to make papers any longer than they are, and we tend to want shorter papers. So another trick there is actually to use tables to present qualitative results, and I'm going to mention using tables with quantitative results too. So let's leave qualitative results and methods and studies aside for the time being. If you're presenting the results of a quantitative study, then the writing should be fairly minimal. You should make good use of tables and figures. It's always much better to try and present visually what you've done and then to write about that, rather than to describe it at a great length, because that's very difficult to do. So, for example, you may have a large sample, large demographics to explain. You may have a large sample with men and women with various sort of diagnosis or social circumstances or educational background, income background, whatever. There may be lots and lots of data to present about people. And so I would strongly advocate that you use tables to present these data. And you can use tables, you can also use figures, but if you use figures to present demographic data, you need lots and lots of them. You need separate ones for the age categories, the gender categories, and income categories, and so on, diagnostic categories. So it's not so helpful. Try and put these data into a table, and then you shouldn't then write a description of that table saying what everything in the table was. Okay, what you should do is try to summarize the main points in the table, So you could present a very big table and you could just point out, that the majority of the sample were male, or very few of the sample had the particular diagnosis that you were interested in. Try and present that in a sort of general way. People can see the table, they can look at the table, and they can look for what they are interested in. Just a word about presenting tables. They're a very important part of the results, and people do have a great deal of difficulty in presenting tables sometimes. The best thing to do for presenting tables is to make them as what we call as parsimonious as possible. That's a big word, which means to make them as short as possible, but also to have as much information as possible. It's a balance that you've got to get right. And this, to some extent, comes with practice. But I would advocate the best way to see how to present tables is to look at a copy of the journal which you're aiming a paper at and see how people have done it before you. So it's quite simple. Don't sort of think, how do I present this, and make up some new kind of table. Have a look and see how it's been done before and just copy that style. I would also, again, strongly advocate don't use the tables function in Word. Because it's not easy for production processes to use. Use open tables with tabs to space things out, not the space bar. That's another hint. And also, like the methods section and the results section standing alone, every table should stand alone. It shouldn't actually require reading of the text to understand the table. Therefore, the title of the table should be very clear and describe what's in it. The table should be clearly organised and clearly labelled with as much numerical information in there as you need. Real numbers, means, percentages, for example, and any statistical parameters. And anything that's unusual in the table, for example, acronyms and abbreviations, these should be described in the legend to the table. So do make sure that when you look at a table, or that you don't need to refer anywhere else to understand it. It should stand completely alone. Likewise with figures. Figures can be used very effectively to summarise data. As I say, not the demographic data necessarily, but maybe looking at trends, or looking at something that can be presented as a figure. And again, they should stand alone. A very clear title, they should be clearly labelled, axis should be labelled, points in it should be labelled, and there should be a legend to describe exactly what you're looking at. One of the things you must not do is you mustn't present data in a table and in a figure and then describe it in detail in the text. Only one way. Usually a table with some description, or a figure with some description in the text, but don't present tables and figures of the same data. You won't be allowed to do that because usually there's a limited number of tables and figures required, and anyway, it's very bad practice to do that. You've got to decide how best to describe it. So that really is it about writing up results section. They should be short, they should be concise and self-contained. Put as much as you can in tables and use figures if you can. When you present the results, for example, if you say, for example, that there were more men than women in the sample, and this was very surprising, it was like, don't start discussing the results. State the results, just state them, just sort of cold, straightforwardly. Leave the discussion for the next section of the paper. That's everything that I want to say, really, about writing writing up your results section for a paper. Keep it short, keep it discreet, use tables and figures wisely, and don't begin to discuss the results. Simply state them. I hope that was useful, and as usual, thank you very much for listening.